Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Ever seen an HOA go after the one house they can't control? Mine did, over tomato beds. First came a neon notice on my door, then escalating fines, then talk of liens. I kept thinking, they can't be serious, but the next step they took made my stomach drop. Why was there a truck in my driveway? I need to tell you about the most satisfying year of my life. And it all started with some tomato plants. So here's the deal. I live in this great little house that my grandfather bought back in 1985. It's nothing fancy, but it's got character. Real hardwood floors, a decent-sized lot, mature trees in the backyard, the kind of place that feels like home the second you walk in. My grandfather passed it down to my dad, and when I was looking to buy my first place about 5 years ago, Dad sold it to me for way below market value. Best gift I ever got. The property sits on about a third of an acre, which is massive compared to what surrounds me now. See, about 8 years ago, some developer bought up all the farmland around my house and threw up this massive subdivision. We're talking 200 plus homes, all the same 5-floor plans, all painted in various shades of beige and gray. The developer tried to buy my property too, offered my dad a ridiculous amount of money, but Dad said no. He knew I'd want it someday. So now my house is this little island of personality in a sea of identical builder-grade rectangles. My lot line starts where the sidewalk ends, and technically I'm surrounded by the subdivision, but I'm not part of it. Never have been. The subdivision has an HOA, a very active HOA, and that's where our story really begins. I'm a gardener. Not like a casual, oh, I have some petunias gardener. I'm talking serious vegetable gardening. It's my therapy, my exercise, my hobby, and my obsession all rolled into one. After a long day at work, there's nothing better than getting my hands in the dirt and watching things grow. Over the years, I've built up my little urban farm. I've got 6 raised beds in the backyard, all made from cedar that I cut and assembled myself. I grow heirloom tomatoes, the kind you can't get at any store. Cherokee purple, brandywine, green zebra. I've got bell peppers in every color, jalapenos, serranos, and these amazing shishito peppers that I'm mildly addicted to. There's a whole bed dedicated to herbs, another for lettuce and greens, and I've got pole beans climbing up a trellis I built against the back fence. My front yard is more traditional, just grass and some foundation plantings, but the backyard is where the magic happens. In the summer, it smells like tomato plants and basil. In the fall, I'm pulling up carrots and cutting back the pepper plants. It's my happy place. Now, the HOA president, I'm not going to use her real name, but let's just say she fits the stereotype so perfectly that it's almost parody. She's a retired something or other with way too much time on her hands, and she spends that time cruising the neighborhood in her little golf cart with a clipboard, measuring tape, and a camera. I've watched her measure the height of people's grass. I've seen her take photos of trash cans that were left out an hour past the designated time. She once cited someone for having a wreath on their door that was non-seasonal in late March. The neighbors in the subdivision all hate her, but they're stuck. They signed their HOA agreements when they bought their houses. Me? I just watched the show from my non-HOA island and felt grateful. She knew I wasn't in the HOA. She had to know. But I think it drove her crazy that there was this one property in her neighborhood that she couldn't control. Everything was fine until this spring. I'd been planning an expansion. The backyard beds were at capacity and I wanted to grow more. I had this side yard that got great southern exposure and it was just sitting there being useless grass, so I decided to build 3 more raised beds. I spent 2 weekends building them. Cedar boards, 3 feet by 8 feet, about 2 feet tall. I made them really nice with proper corner joints and everything. I filled them with a mix of compost, peat moss, and vermiculite. I planted 2 beds with tomatoes and one with a mix of summer squash and cucumbers. They looked beautiful. I was so proud of them. The side yard is technically visible from the street if you're really looking, but it's not like they're right out front. You'd have to walk past my house and crane your neck a bit to see them clearly. Apparently, that was enough. 3 days after I finished planting, I came home from work to find this obnoxious neon pink piece of paper taped to my front door. Like, aggressively taped. They'd used packing tape and really went to town with it. The paper said, "Notice of violation" in huge letters at the top. Below that, it cited some bylaw, Article 4, Section 9 or something, about unauthorized agricultural structures. It said my raised beds were not in compliance with community standards, that the natural wood color was not part of the approved color palette, and that they needed to be removed within 10 days. At the bottom, there was a note that failure to comply would result in fines starting at $50 and doubling every 7 days until compliance was achieved. I stood there on my porch, staring at this thing, and I just started laughing. It was so ridiculous. I wasn't in their HOA. This was like getting a parking ticket for a car I didn't own. I crumpled it up and threw it in the recycling bin. Problem solved, right? Wrong. A week and a half later, I was out watering my new plants. It was a Saturday morning, beautiful weather, and I was in my element. I had my hose, I was checking on my tomato seedlings, and I was thinking about whether I needed to add some fertilizer. That's when I heard the golf cart. She pulled up right to the edge of my property and got out. She was wearing a visor and carrying her ever-present clipboard. She walked right up to my side yard like she owned the place. She asked me why the unauthorized structures were still there. I turned off the hose and walked over. I kept my tone polite. I told her I wasn't part of the HOA, so the notice didn't apply to me. You should have seen her face. She literally scoffed, like, actually made that sound. She said everyone within the neighborhood boundaries was part of the HOA, and that I was clearly within the boundaries. She said I was trying to dodge a fine and that lying about it would only make things worse for me. I told her again, very clearly, that my property predated the subdivision by a decade and was never part of the HOA agreement. I suggested she check her records. She got this smug look and said the fines were now at $100 since I'd missed the deadline and that they'd double to $200 next week if I didn't comply. Then she got back in her golf cart and drove off. I went inside and pulled out my property deed just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. Nope. My deed made no mention of any HOA. My property had been deeded in 1985, and there were no covenants, conditions, or restrictions attached to it. I figured she'd figure it out eventually and leave me alone. She did not leave me alone. 2 weeks later, I got an official-looking letter in the mail. It was from the HOA, with their logo and everything. It said I was in violation of community standards, that my fines had now reached $200, and that I needed to contact them immediately to arrange payment and removal of the structures. I threw that one away too. A week after that, another letter. Fines were now at $400, then $800. I started getting annoyed. This was harassment at this point. But I also figured they'd eventually realize their mistake or give up. Then came the day I got home from work and saw two guys with a truck in my driveway. I pulled in behind them and got out. They were landscapers wearing uniforms from some company I'd never heard of. They said they were there to remove some garden structures. I asked who sent them. They said the HOA. I told them they were on private property without permission and needed to leave immediately. One of them got on his phone, presumably calling whoever hired them. While he was on the phone, I saw her. The HOA president was standing on the sidewalk watching, just standing there with her arms crossed. The landscaper got off the phone and said they'd been told they had authorization to enter the property. I told them they absolutely did not, that I was not part of the HOA, and that if they didn't leave right now, I'd call the police for trespassing. They looked at each other, looked at their truck, and decided it wasn't worth the hassle. They left. But as they drove off, she walked up to the edge of my property and started yelling. She said I was breaking the law, that I was in violation of legally binding covenants, and that the HOA would place a lien on my house and foreclose if I didn't comply. She said I'd lose my house over some stupid garden beds. That's when I decided I was done being nice. I went inside and called a real estate attorney I'd used when I bought the house. I explained the situation. He laughed and said this happened more often than you'd think. He told me to let them keep digging their hole, and that we'd shut them down permanently when the time was right. He drafted a cease and desist letter, but he told me to hold on to it for now. He said if the HOA wanted to make this official, we should let them. It would be more satisfying that way. A week later, I got another letter. This one invited me to a disciplinary hearing. It said my total fines were now over $2,000 and that the board would be voting on whether to place a lien on my property. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7 p.m. at the community clubhouse. I called my attorney. He told me to go. He said to bring my property deed, the original survey, and the county zoning maps showing when my property was platted versus when the subdivision was developed. He said he'd be available by phone if I needed him, but that I probably wouldn't. I showed up to that hearing with a folder full of documents and a pretty significant chip on my shoulder. The community clubhouse was one of those bland rooms with folding tables and chairs. The HOA board was sitting at a long table at the front. 5 people total, with the president in the middle. There were maybe a dozen other residents scattered around the room, probably there for other business or just to watch the show. The president saw me walk in and got this huge smile on her face, like she'd won already. They went through some other boring HOA business first. Approval for someone to repaint their house, a discussion about the pool schedule, that kind of thing. Then they got to me. The president made a whole speech about community standards and how rules exist for a reason. She said that someone in the community was flagrantly violating ordinances and refusing to pay fines. She read off a list of the violations and the escalating fines. She said the total was now $2,400. Then she looked right at me and asked if I had anything to say before the board voted on placing a lien. I asked if I could see the documentation showing that my property was part of the HOA. She looked annoyed. She said that all properties within the community boundaries were automatically included. She pulled out a map of the subdivision and pointed to my house, which was clearly surrounded by subdivision properties. I nodded and said that was a nice map. Then I pulled out my property deed and slid it across the table. I said that my property was deeded in 1985, a full 8 years before the subdivision was developed. I said there was no HOA agreement in my chain of title. She barely glanced at it. She said that didn't matter, that when the subdivision was created, all properties within the boundaries were included. I pulled out the county zoning maps. I slid those across too. I explained very calmly that my property was what's called an enclave. I said the developer never owned my land and therefore couldn't include it in the HOA. I said that for my property to be part of the HOA, either my grandfather, my father, or I would have had to voluntarily sign an agreement to join. None of us ever did. The room got quiet. One of the other board members picked up my deed and started reading it. Another one grabbed the zoning maps. The president was still trying to maintain her confident expression, but I could see doubt creeping in. Then someone else spoke up. An older guy at the end of the table, who I later found out was the board's attorney. He asked if he could see the documents. I slid everything down to him. He spent maybe 2 minutes reading. Then he set the papers down and rubbed his face with both hands. He turned to the president and asked to speak to her privately. She said whatever he had to say could be said in front of the board. He very carefully explained that my property was not part of the HOA. He said that my deed clearly predated the subdivision, that there was no HOA agreement in the chain of title, and that the HOA had no legal authority over my property. Then he said that all the letters, fines, and attempts to remove my property constituted harassment and possibly extortion. The president's face went from confident to confused to bright red in about 10 seconds. She started arguing with him. She said there had to be something they could do. He just shook his head. I pulled out my own letter then, the cease and desist my attorney had drafted. I slid it across the table and said that if I received any further contact from the HOA regarding my property, I'd be filing a lawsuit for harassment, attempted extortion, and the trespassing incident with the landscapers. The attorney picked up the letter, read it, and set it down. He turned to the president and told her to apologize to me. Right now, on the record. She just stared at him. He said it again. Apologize now or he'd be recommending the board remove her as president immediately to limit liability. She gave the most insincere apology I've ever heard. She said she was sorry for the misunderstanding. I just nodded. I said I expected all fines to be removed from any records they had. The attorney confirmed they would be. Then I got up and left. I heard later from one of my neighbors in the subdivision that the board meeting after I left was apparently spectacular. The president tried to defend herself, but the rest of the board was furious. They'd almost been sued because she couldn't be bothered to check whether she actually had jurisdiction over a property before harassing someone for months. There was a special election a month later. She was voted out as president. She stayed on the board for a few more months, but I heard she eventually resigned completely. As for me, my garden is thriving. Those 3 side yard beds produced an amazing crop of tomatoes and squash. I've already started planning next year's expansion, and I did add one final touch. I went to a garden store and found the tackiest lawn ornament I could find. It's a 3-foot-tall pink flamingo wearing sunglasses. I put it right on my property line in the side yard facing the street where it's clearly visible to anyone driving by. Every time I water my plants, I see that flamingo and smile. It's my little reminder that some battles are worth fighting and that sometimes the best revenge is just living your life exactly how you want to on your own property. The tomatoes this year tasted especially good. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I have this aunt named Jean, who is, well, a bit of a jerk. One of those people who always wants to stir up drama, get people in trouble, cause fights, etc. When I was a teenager, she'd go out of her way to try to get me in trouble with my parents because she said they were too lenient. At the time of this story, I'm 14 years old and had been a regular smoker for 4 years. Started early but quit in my late 20s, now 30 plus years tobacco-free. My parents knew that I smoked, but had a don't ask, don't tell mentality about it. They'd punish me if they caught me smoking at home, even though they both smoked, or outside, but otherwise pretty much ignored it. This laissez-faire attitude drove dear old Auntie Jean nuts, so she'd regularly try to out me for smoking to get me in trouble. This included demanding to smell my fingers when I came home, or had been outside and out of sight for a while. If she smelled tobacco, she'd rat on me to my mom, who'd usually ground me for a day or two. One day, dear old Auntie Jean is visiting my mom, and they're sitting at the table having a lovely little chinwag. I came home and went in to say hi, and immediately dear old Auntie Jean demands to smell my fingers. I said, "Oh, wait a minute, I have to do something first," and ran upstairs before my mom finally got annoyed enough with dear old Auntie Jean's whining to force me to let her sniff my digits. Dear old Auntie Jean yelled after me, "I'd better not hear the water running or I'll know you washed the smoke stink off." Once upstairs, I went into the bathroom and proceeded to drop a nice stinky poo. Finished up as I normally would, but didn't wash my hands, as per dear old Auntie Jean's orders. I came back down into the kitchen and presented my hand for dear old Auntie Jean to sniff. She gave my fingers a good long inhale. "Ew, that smells like crap," said dear old Auntie Jean. I nodded thoughtfully and said, "Okay," before turning to pour myself a cup of coffee. I had my back to them, and there was a period of about 10 to 15 seconds of expectant silence as they waited for me to tell them what the smell was. Finally, my mom said, "Well, what was the smell?" "Oh, it was crap." Dear old Auntie Jean immediately began gagging and rushed to the sink. For some reason, the actual smell of poop didn't make her sick, but learning it was poop did. Not sure if legitimately psychosomatic or just more drama, but she spent several minutes retching in the sink. My mom was simultaneously amused but slightly annoyed and asked me why I did that. She told me not to wash my hands, just following orders. "You want to sniff my fingers, dear old Auntie Jean? Enjoy a nose full of poop smell." The next one is an entitled people story. Sometimes when I read stories of people acting ridiculously entitled, I wonder, do these people really exist? Then I stop and remember that I have encountered people like this in my real life and that I really shouldn't be that surprised. Anyway, my job is sort of like a chauffeur at a housing complex. Living here gives you access to the ride service. Nothing like Uber. Only residents can use it. People book rides in advance for things like doctor's appointments, then I drive them there and back home and they don't have to pay. It's a simple job but can sometimes get very busy and I'm the only driver. Because of this, there can be delays on pickups. I try to keep wait times to a minimum, but sometimes I'm dropping off a client while another is finishing up across town, so one has to wait a bit. The vast majority of my clientele are perfectly fine with waiting an extra few minutes for a free ride. Enter Guy fake name. Guy already has a reputation for being very demanding and has been impatient with me before. And I have another doctor's appointment booked around the same time as his. As part of the procedure when I have 2 appointments close to each other, I ask him, "So how long do you think your appointment is going to be?" Guy says, "I don't know, but you are going to wait for me outside." He says this in a tone that will brook no argument. It is very clearly his "I'm going to get my way" voice. I was already cringing inside because I knew what was coming. I inform him that, unfortunately, I had another appointment that I had to get to, but that, "So you mean I'll have to wait?" he growls, literally, interrupting me with the same tone as before. I tell him that he might have to wait if his appointment finishes before I drop the other client off at their doctor. "That's effing unreal!" he shouts. "Effing unreal how you treat us. You can't be effing serious, and I can't effing believe you," etc. After ranting like this for a bit, Guy demands to know if I was serious again and pauses to wait for an answer. I tell him that yes, he may have to wait. May. "I'm telling your boss all about you. You better effing believe I will, buddy. You are going to wait. I don't care what else you got." At this point, I can see I'm not getting anywhere, so I tell him, I am not going to continue engaging in this conversation. He says, "Damn right you won't. Better believe it." He says this like he just won the argument, then sits there huffing with his arms crossed until I drop him off. I immediately call my boss and report him for being aggressive, threatening to make frivolous complaints about me and demanding I cancel another client's ride. Boss tells me to cancel his pickup and that they would take care of it. Love my boss, BTW, they take my safety very seriously. I go and drive the other client, who is a patient and sweet old lady who always expresses her gratitude for the service. Then write a detailed report about what happened and send it in. Funny enough, he did sort of get his way. My boss went and picked him up, so he didn't end up waiting when he was done after all. Apparently, he was meek as a mouse on the ride home and didn't mention me once. It was too late, though. He may have been bluffing about reporting me, but I did not hesitate about reporting him. Boss and manager read my account, took into consideration his already less than stellar reputation, and banned him from the ride service indefinitely. He later tried to go over my head using an inside connection he had to a board member to make a complaint against me, and they took it quite seriously. We had to relitigate the whole thing, and it was pretty scary. Thankfully, my boss and manager both went to bat for me and reiterated their defense. Upper management took my side, and the permanent ban was upheld. To this day, this occurred about 2 years ago, Guy still glares at me and flips me off when he sees me. I also know that he lies about what happened to try and muddy my name in the community. Most people know what he's full of, though. Remember, all of this happened not because I told him he would have to wait an extra 10 or 15 minutes after his appointment. It happened because I told him he might have to wait. Funniest part of the story is that the timing ended in a way that he wouldn't have had to wait had he not flipped out like that. Oh, and the indefinite ban is and always has been contingent upon him making an in-person apology to me with witnesses where he specifically acknowledges the threat he made. My boss let me set those terms. He knows those are the terms to regain access to the ride service. If he ever does agree and actually does give me an apology like that, I'd gladly return his services. But I am 100% confident that he would rather die before doing that. This is a guy who is used to being able to stamp his feet and get his way. It's hard to express how satisfying it was to deny someone like that. The next one is an entitled parent story. A little backstory before I start copy and pasting the email thread where this all took place. In October, I started running a very successful sewing workshop with another artist. I won't say exactly what the workshop was because it's quite unique and I would like everyone to remain anonymous, but it's been very popular with all ages. In November, this woman contacted me wanting to schedule a workshop for homeschoolers, saying she easily get 30 kids to sign up. Because of this and the fact that she was only available between 10:30 and 3 on Fridays, none of my usual venues would have worked, so I had to rent a different one that was more expensive, but she promised me 30 kids, so that was okay. This venue is on the outskirts of town, but she agrees to have the workshop there. This is important later on. We decide on early February, giving her about 2 months to advertise. 2 weeks before the event, she tells me she only has 9 kids registered and wants to move the event to March-April. I'm slightly annoyed by this, but she assures me she can get more kids, so I agree. We rebook for April 3rd, and I send her another poster. I am late getting this to her, but she still has it a month before the workshop, which is how long I typically advertise for. She then wants to move the date again. This is where I'll start directly quoting our emails. It's important to note that in the time since she has contacted me, we have had over 60 people take this workshop. I have no idea why she was so confident she could get that many kids and then failed so spectacularly. Homeschool parent. "Okay, thanks. Maybe I need to move it again then. We only have 9 kids signed up. I don't feel we will get enough. I'll ask the parents what they think and get back to you." Me. I spoke with my co-facilitator and we're not comfortable moving the date with our current arrangement. I would lose another $50 deposit on the space rental, and my co-facilitator has already booked the day off from their day job, meaning they will lose out on another day of income. We would be okay moving the date if you took responsibility for the space rental and paid us a deposit for the new date. Let me know, HP. I understand. I didn't realize the costs and everything. Unfortunately, though, it seems like it takes a few weeks for you to respond to me each email, which has made it difficult to arrange things and advertise. What will happen if we don't have enough kids for this event? I really feel it's not working doing it out in location of Community Hall. It's too far for everyone. It would be better to do it closer in town. The current location is just not working. Me. I hadn't really thought through what to do if we did not get enough kids. As you said, you could easily get 30 registrations. As this is my job and I cannot afford to lose money on events we would have to cancel, my bad for not communicating this earlier. Sounds like it would be best to cancel for April 3rd then, as I do not have time to secure a different venue. Our offer still stands that we will move the date if you are able to take care of the venue and pay a deposit. HP. This is such a shame because I knew Community Hall would be very difficult for us to get homeschoolers out to. I'll see what I can do. So far, so many people told me community hall locations does not work. I will keep trying and see what we can do. Thanks, HP. Sent at 9:30 p.m. the night before the workshop would have been. I didn't hear back from you. Is everything still good for tomorrow? I meant to email you earlier today, but I was waiting on other RSVPs for the workshop while I had choir practice tonight. We only have 7 booked and paid. 2 of them canceled but not asking for a refund because they moved. So 5 attending and 7 paid. Hopefully that extra $110 with no supplies needed will help make up for the low attendance. I am so sorry the class is so small, but I rather run it than not at this point. I didn't know it was Easter when we changed the date and you wouldn't let me change it again. Please let's run the course anyway for the 5 excited kids. I will market this tons better in the future. I already have lots of interest for down the road. They just can't make tomorrow. I would love to book one in the fall and have it in different community hall. I would pay for the hall next time. We have the insurance paid for a year as well. If we are still running tomorrow, I will transfer you payment for 7 immediately in the morning before class starts. Thank you. Me sent very reactively because I was shocked by her email. Do you have a venue? Because I canceled community hall based on your previous email. HP. I didn't know that you canceled it. I did not ask to cancel it in my last email. I said I will work on the registration. This is so disappointing. We can do it at my house then. Address. What time will you be there to set up? Me. I have reviewed our previous emails and spoken to my co-facilitator. Based on your last email, I was waiting for you to let me know if you got enough registrations or if you wanted to change plans. As with most rentals, if I had waited this long, I would have had to pay the full fee, not knowing if you had enough participants. As I stated in my previous email, we would need at least 15 participants to proceed on the 3rd. Otherwise, we would require a deposit and for you to acquire the rental. Given that none of those conditions were met, we are not prepared to run the workshop tomorrow. Apologies for the inconvenience, HP. I am really disappointed with how this all turned out. The communication was terrible with you. You took up to 4 weeks sometimes to reply to me. Most times 2 weeks. It took you a month to send me the new poster when I requested for it. It made me very delayed to advertise. When I learned the mistake of booking on Easter, early Easter this year, you would not work with me to change it. Then you cancel it and not reply to my email and not even tell me you canceled it. I find your organization very disorganized and a disappoint. I could have brought you a lot of business. Instead, you lacked communication and were not very professional. I literally cackled at, I could have brought you a lot of business. Girl, it took you 5 months to get 5 kids. I think I'll be fine without your business. Before people sound off in the comments, yes, I probably should have checked in with her before canceling the venue, but the ball was pretty clearly in her court at that point, and honestly, I was just done with her. Yes, it did take me longer than it should have to get back to her a couple times, but she still had everything she needed to advertise well before the event. And yes, I definitely should have had her pay a deposit and sign a contract right from the start, but you live and you learn. The really funny part is that my partner looked her up on Facebook and we found out she's a right-wing Christian homeschooler. I'm also 90% sure her husband has contacted my booking line. I'm also a sex worker. Why she wanted to book 2 very openly and obviously queer leftists is beyond me. Anyway, thank you for watching.